He didn't ask for attention, and he certainly didn't expect what was about to happen. The old man stepped into the bank with slow, careful movements, holding the door just long enough to avoid drawing notice. At 90 years old, every step carried the weight of time, yet there was something steady about him, something grounded. His clothes were simple, slightly worn but clean, and his eyes held a quiet calm that most people overlooked. Inside, the bank was alive with urgency. Conversations overlapped, phones rang, and people moved with purpose, discussing figures that sounded more like business strategies than everyday life. He paused for a moment, allowing his eyes to adjust, then made his way toward the counter. No one greeted him. No one needed to. In a place like this, people often assumed they already knew who mattered. When his turn came, he stepped forward gently, placing one hand on the counter for support. The young employee looked up briefly, offering a polite but distracted smile. Her attention was divided, her mind already moving ahead to the next task. He didn't seem to mind. In a soft, steady voice, he said he wanted to check his balance. Just that. No explanation, no urgency. A few feet away, a well-dressed man stood waiting. His presence carried confidence, the kind that came from years of success and recognition. He glanced over at the old man, his eyes quickly scanning him from head to toe. The request seemed almost out of place in his ears. A faint smirk crossed his face, subtle enough to go unnoticed by most, but clear in its meaning. The old man remained still, patient as the employee began typing. He didn't rush her, didn't shift his weight or show any sign of discomfort. It was as if he had all the time in the world. Meanwhile, the millionaire looked away, dismissing the moment as unimportant. To him, it was just another small interaction in a place filled with much larger concerns. But something about the old man didn't quite match the assumptions being made. Beneath the quiet exterior, there was a sense of certainty, as if he already knew exactly what he would hear. And while the room continued moving at its usual pace, that small moment at the counter was beginning to build into something no one there was prepared for. The employee's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, her attention fixed on the screen as she pulled up the account details. First, everything seemed routine. Another customer, another quick check, another moment that would pass without meaning. Then her expression shifted, almost too subtly to notice. Fingers slowed, hovering above the keys as her eyes focused more carefully on the numbers in front of her. Blinked once, then leaned slightly closer to the monitor. The calm rhythm she had maintained all morning began to break. Something wasn't aligning with what she expected. Glanced at the old man briefly, as if to confirm she had the right person, then looked back at the screen again. It stretched longer than usual, and it didn't go unnoticed. The old man stood exactly as he had before, calm and patient. There was no curiosity in his expression, no sign that he felt the need to question the delay. His posture remained steady, his hands relaxed against the counter. It was as though he had seen this reaction before, or perhaps he simply wasn't concerned with how long it took. For him, it was just a moment, nothing more. Nearby, the millionaire shifted his stance slightly. He hadn't meant to pay attention, but the pause at the counter drew him back in. He turned his head just enough to observe without making it obvious. At first, his expression remained casual, almost indifferent. But as the seconds passed and the employee's reaction became harder to ignore, his curiosity began to replace that earlier dismissiveness. The employee cleared her throat softly, her voice no longer as routine as before. Asked the old man to confirm his details once again, her tone more careful this time. He nodded gently, repeating the information without hesitation. Every detail matched perfectly. Still, she hesitated before speaking again, as though choosing her words with precision. The atmosphere around the counter began to shift, subtle but undeniable. The background noise of the bank seemed to fade slightly, not because it had stopped, but because attention was slowly gathering in one place. A few nearby customers glanced over, sensing that something out of the ordinary was happening, even if they didn't yet understand what it was. The millionaire took a small step closer, no longer pretending to ignore the situation. His earlier smirk had disappeared, replaced by a quiet focus. He wasn't sure what the employee had found, but whatever it was, it had clearly disrupted her usual composure. And that alone was enough to make him pay attention. Old man, however, remained unchanged. His presence stood in contrast to the growing tension around him. He waited, not with impatience, but with quiet certainty. And in that stillness, the moment continued to build, moving closer to a revelation that would challenge every assumption made just minutes earlier. The employee took a slow breath before speaking, her eyes still fixed on the screen as if the numbers might change if she looked long enough. When she finally said the balance, her voice was lower than before, careful, almost uncertain. It wasn't just a large amount. It was the kind of number that didn't belong to assumptions, the kind that shifted the meaning of everything in that moment. For a second, no one reacted. The words seemed to hang in the air, waiting to be understood. Then the silence broke, not with noise, but with attention. The millionaire, who had been standing nearby, turned fully this time. His posture straightened, his expression tightening as the number settled in his mind. It didn't match what he had expected, not even close. He stepped closer, no longer hiding his interest. His earlier confidence felt slightly misplaced now, replaced by something quieter, more focused. He looked at the old man again, but this time his gaze was different. It wasn't dismissive. It was searching, trying to reconcile the image in front of him with the reality he had just heard. The employee adjusted her posture, her tone shifting noticeably as she repeated the balance more clearly. There was respect in her voice now, a careful professionalism that hadn't been there before. He even turned the screen slightly, offering the old man a direct view, as if to confirm that what she was saying was real. The old man leaned in just enough to see, then gave a small, calm nod. There was no surprise in his reaction, no excitement or need to respond with anything more. It was as though the number held no emotional weight for him. He had come for confirmation, and now he had it. That was enough. Around them, a few more people began to notice. Conversation softened, attention drifting toward the counter. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but the shift was clear. Something unexpected had happened, and it was quietly reshaping the atmosphere of the room. The millionaire let out a slow breath, his thoughts moving quickly now. Just moments ago, he had dismissed the old man without a second thought. Now, he found himself questioning that instinct. There was a gap between appearance and reality that he hadn't anticipated, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The old man straightened slightly, thanking the employee in a calm, respectful tone. His voice hadn't changed, his presence remained steady, yet the way he was being seen had transformed completely. What had once seemed ordinary now carried a weight no one could ignore. As he prepared to step away from the counter, the room felt different. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because something quiet and undeniable had been revealed. And for those who witnessed it, especially the men who had once laughed, it was a moment that would not be easily forgotten. Oldman turned away from the counter with the same slow, steady movement he had when he arrived. Nothing about his pace changed, nothing about his expression suggested that anything unusual had just happened. Yet behind him, the atmosphere he left behind felt completely different. Conversations that once carried confidence now seemed quieter, more measured, as if everyone had been reminded of something they had forgotten. The employee watched him for a moment longer than necessary, her posture still composed but her expression thoughtful. She had seen many customers, handled countless transactions, but this moment stood apart, not because of the number alone, but because of how easily she had almost overlooked him. That realization stayed with her as she returned to her work, her movements now more attentive than before. The millionaire remained still for a few seconds, his eyes following the old man as he walked toward the exit. The earlier smirk was gone completely. In its place was something heavier, something reflective. He wasn't used to being wrong in his judgments, especially not in such a simple situation. Yet this had been immediate, undeniable. He had formed an opinion within seconds, and it had collapsed just as quickly. Without fully thinking it through, he stepped forward and called out gently, asking the old man to wait. The request wasn't loud, but it carried enough sincerity to stop him. The old man paused and turned slowly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. There was no challenge in his eyes, no sign of offense, only a calm readiness to listen. For a moment, the millionaire seemed unsure of what to say. Words that once came easily now felt unnecessary or misplaced. Finally, he spoke with a quieter tone, acknowledging the moment in a simple way. It wasn't an apology filled with long explanations, but it carried enough honesty to be understood. Oldman listened, then gave a small nod. The response was brief, but meaningful. He spoke about time, about how life changes people in ways that aren't always visible. His voice remained steady, carrying a sense of experience rather than pride. It wasn't about proving anything, it was about perspective. That short exchange held more weight than any long conversation could have. The millionaire stood there, absorbing the words, realizing that success wasn't always something you could recognize at a glance. Sometimes it was hidden behind simplicity, shaped by years that no one else had witnessed. The old man offered a final polite gesture before continuing toward the exit. No one overlooked him. People noticed, not because of what he wore or how he appeared, but because something about him had been revealed in a way that could not be ignored. As the door closed behind him, the room slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But for those who had seen what happened, especially the men who had once laughed, the moment lingered. It stayed as a quiet reminder that every person carries a story, and sometimes, the ones you least expect are the ones who have lived the most.